Hello everyone, welcome back to Q's Book Reviews. My name is Quinn, and today I thought I'd do something which I know has been done kind of a lot by other people, and that's a tier list video. But I'm not sure I've ever seen anyone rank all the books that they read, which is what I'm going to do today, taking advantage of the fact that so far I haven't actually read that many books. So yeah, now I'm going to try to rank just about every book I've read. I guess not including those I read as a kid, or maybe a few in high school that I don't quite remember. And I'm not quite sure how long this is going to be, so without further ado, let's get right into it. Alright, going over the tiers themselves. The lowest tier I have is Why Did I Waste My Life Reading This? This is probably going to be reserved for only a few books, because I usually try to pick out books that I think I'm going to like. But these are books that I just didn't enjoy, wish I hadn't read. Yeah. Then we have Not My Cup of Tea. These are again books that I probably didn't like, but I think they're probably good books at the same time. It's just not the book for me. Then we have The Good Cancels Out the Bad. This is sort of like the middle tier. I feel pretty meh on all of these books. They're not the best, not the worst, somewhere in the middle. Then we're getting into books that I do like, I have positive feelings about, starting off with Would Recommend. These are maybe not the best books in the world, but I would recommend them to almost anybody. The penultimate tier is Just Really Good. These are fantastic books, really the cream of the crop. They're maybe not my absolute favorites of all time, but they're excellent books and everyone should read them. Finally, there's I'd Sell My Soul to Read It Again. These are amazing books. Really, the first time reading these is like a magical experience. I wish I could recapture it. And yeah, these are like my absolute favorite books of all time. Okay, so starting off, we've got All About Love by Bell Hooks. This is a book that sort of tries to answer the question of what is love, and it has a variety of essays going into different details about relationships, stuff like that. Pretty interesting. This is my first work by Bell Hooks that I read, and I definitely want to read more of it, or more from her, sorry. And yeah, I think it's pretty alright. There's some parts about it that I wasn't a huge fan of, but overall, it's definitely an interesting look into sort of the world of love, and yeah, I would say I would recommend it. Next is The Algerian Chronicles by Albert Camus. This is a collection of a whole bunch of writings by Camus on the topic of Algeria during the Algerian War, and actually before the outbreak of it as well. He did a lot of journalism about the problems that Algeria was facing, and he was pretty sympathetic to their cause, but as I've gone over at length in a different video, ultimately he has some pretty strange ideas about how Algeria should be. He's against like the independence of it. So while he does cover a lot of important topics in this book, ultimately his ideas about Algeria sort of just flounder. So if you're wanting to, get into the mind of Camus and how he thinks about the topic, I think it's really good for that. But it's not going to stand up super well today. I don't know. I'm either putting it in Would Recommend or The Good Cancels Out the Bad. Yeah, I mean, again, if you're interested in Camus' takes on Algeria, I would say Would Recommend, but yeah, I'll put it there. All right, next up is After Dark by Haruki Murakami. I think this is one of the earlier books that he wrote. It's not super long. It's honestly more of just like vibes, which I know a lot of his books are that way, but this one in particular. The plot isn't super deep. The characters aren't super deep. Yeah, I don't know. I wasn't in love with this one. Definitely other of his works I've liked more, and I want to read more from him because I think he's got a lot of better stuff than this. So I would say probably The Good Cancels Out the Bad, sort of just middle of the road book. Which I can't say about the next book on here, As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. I just recently read this and wow, it's a really great book. Really moving, pretty difficult at times. And yeah, it makes me very excited to read more from him. This follows the Bundren family as they attempt to bury their mother, sort of the matriarch of the family. And of course, all sorts of things go awry. And yeah, the family really struggles, but it's super powerful, as I said, so. This is one of my favorites. I'd say I'd sell my soul to read it again. Really, really like this book. Moving on to Anne of Green Gables. This is more of a kid's book, but I read it actually not super long ago, so a little bit older than the target demographic, but it's super wholesome. It takes place out on, I think, Prince Edward Island in Canada, which is just a really beautiful place. So the scenery is amazing. The story is, as I said, really wholesome, and it's fun following along in Anne's adventures. Yeah, I like this a lot. I haven't read anything more in the series, but I might at some point. I would say, you know, I don't really have many faults with it. I'd say it's just really good. Definitely read it. Now, All Quiet on the Western Front is actually a book that I read in college for one of my classes. But saying that, I actually really enjoyed it. Sometimes I kind of regret having to do reading for school, but this one I really liked. It tells a story about soldiers during World War I, which was a really horrific war. And so the stories that get told here are pretty gruesome, but really moving. Yeah, it's a powerful book. I would say if you're interested in World War I, it's definitely a good read. I would probably put it in the would recommend tier. Then we've got a book in the realm of politics. This is Black Shirts and Reds by Michael Parenti. This is really like light theory. It's super popular as sort of like a starting place if you want to get into political theory. And overall, it's actually really enjoyable. Parenti's a pretty funny guy, and he keeps the writing very entertaining. Doesn't go super in depth, but it's basically about, the Cold War, and sort of like the war on communism, and how all that propaganda sort of played out within those years. And there's definitely a lot of interesting insights in this book. I think probably his other works maybe go a bit more in detail, and that would be, maybe a better place to, actually learn more. But if you just want an entertaining sort of light political read, this is really great. So just really good. Then we have another book that I read for university, and this is Belonging by Nora Krug. It tells the story, it's biographical, and it tells her story growing up in Germany, right around the fall of the Berlin Wall. I think she returns to the US for a little while, but of course she misses Germany. And it sort of deals with her reconciling with what her family did during the Second World War, which she never really knew growing up. And it sort of follows along as she finds more out about her family, which is of course a question that a lot of Germans had to ask, after the Second World War. And it's pretty good. I think if you're interested in learning about that sort of time period, there's better books, maybe even on this list to do that. So yeah, I'm gonna say the good cancels out the bad, sort of just all right. Okay, for Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, definitely one of the craziest books I've ever read. Heard it described as sort of like a reverse Western, which I think is pretty accurate. It's basically about, America's sort of like genocidal colonization of the Southwest. Really brutal, but also really good. The judge is an unforgettable character. Yeah, I don't know if I'd want to reread it. It's pretty tough, so I'm gonna say just really good. If you're gonna read this one, definitely go in warned that it's pretty brutal. Then we got a short story by Herman Melville. This is Bartleby the Scrivener. This is told from the perspective of a lawyer who hires someone named Bartleby to sort of help him out. And as the story goes on, as the lawyer asks Bartleby to do different things, he'll often respond with just, I would prefer not to. Just refusing to do much of any work at all. Honestly, my idol. You come to find out that he's actually like living in the lawyer's office. And yeah, there's other crazy characters in this book. It's pretty iconic. I would say it's just really good. Definitely read it. Another short one, this is Candide by Voltaire. This of course tells the story of Candide, who believes that he's living in the best of all possible worlds, and sort of deludes himself into thinking that everything is great. Even when people are getting, burned at the stake or what have you, that's actually the best possible outcome. It's pretty absurd. It challenges sort of Leibniz's philosophy at the time. It's a fun read, but honestly, I didn't get quite as much out of it as I would have hoped. I would say just would recommend. I don't think it sort of ascends into any of the higher tiers. Okay, the first Dostoevsky on this list, this is Crime and Punishment, which I don't think is my favorite by him, though it is pretty good. This is a course about a young guy who is very poor, and so he decides to kill a pawnbroker and steal her money. And then it sort of deals with the repercussions of that act and sort of the philosophy of him, and how he can justify that murder, and how he tries to escape from the police and stuff like that. It's pretty interesting, but I don't know, there's some things about it that weren't quite great. The ending in particular wasn't my favorite. I would say, trying to decide how high I want to rank Dostoevsky on here, because setting this one sort of sets the bar for all the other ones. For now, I'll put it in would recommend. I might move it down though, we'll see. Okay, this is Call Me Ishmael by Charles Olson. This is a series of essays on Moby Dick by the pretty famous, I want to say probably postmodern poet Charles Olson. And I think he was really the one to popularize the theory that Herman Melville was really inspired by Shakespeare when he wrote Moby Dick, and how especially the story of King Lear really changed how Moby Dick played out. A lot of this is really interesting. Again, I think if you have any interest in sort of the background behind how Moby Dick was written, I think you get a lot out of this. Yeah, I don't really have many complaints about it, so I'm gonna put it in the really good category. All right, sadly we have one of the first low-ranking books that I'll put on here, and this is Yevgeny Onegin by Alexander Pushkin. This is told in really the form of a long poem about sort of a Russian aristocrat who moves to the countryside. Love affairs happen. There's a weird section about a foot fetish. Yeah, I didn't get a ton out of this, sadly. Again, I think that's because I'm not a huge poetry fan in the first place. But I don't know, I kind of felt like I was wasting my time reading it, unfortunately. I don't feel that way about this one, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This, I know a lot of people say this, but this book was completely different from what I expected it to be, and definitely in a good way. It's way more philosophical than I thought it would be, and there's some really interesting points in here about a whole bunch of different topics. I don't think I'd be willing to sell my soul to reread it, though I do want to reread it. So I think I'm just going to put it in the really good category. If you haven't read it yet, please do yourself the favor and read it. Okay, next up is Giovanni'S Room by James Baldwin. It's about a man in America growing up who, comes to the realization that he's gay. And over the course of a trip in France, he meets a man named Giovanni who he basically falls in love with. And of course, the relationship is very difficult on both of them. And we sort of follow the characters, how the relationship affects them all, and sort of what the impact on their lives is. Again, another pretty powerful one. I really enjoyed it. I think I'm gonna say it's just really good. All right, Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon. This is undoubtedly a masterpiece. I already know I'm gonna have to read it many more times before I get more out of it. I don't even know how to describe the plot to you, other than maybe follows a guy named Tyrone Slothrop who is in Great Britain during the end of World War II. And it seems like all the women he has sex with in that general area, a few days later, a V-2 rocket hits there. These are the bombs that Germany used against Great Britain in the war. But it really goes so many other places. There's so much in this book. It's the craziest book I've ever read. It's complex, but it's really funny at the same time. Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna have to sell my soul to reread it for the first time again. It's incredible. Okay, this is Go Went Gone, another book that I read for university. This deals with sort of immigration in Germany, and sort of the impact on the people in Germany, and then also for the immigrants themselves, which, I mean, Germany has not been very kind to its immigrants that it's let in. I'll just leave it at that. And it sort of starts to get into that, but I don't think it goes as far as it could have. And I don't know, the writing doesn't quite make up for sort of its lack of depth. So I'm gonna put it in the good cancels out the bad. It's not the best book in the world. It's not terrible, but yeah, middle of the road. All right, and then of course, after reading Moby Dick, I had to go on and read King Lear by Shakespeare. I haven't read a ton of Shakespeare yet. I'm gonna try to read more at some point, but I'm not the hugest fan yet. I think I just need to learn more about how to get into it properly. Maybe I need to see it performed. King Lear, though, was pretty good. Yeah, wasn't fantastic, so I'm gonna probably just put it in would recommend. I think it's probably one of the better plays he has written. Of course, I haven't read it enough to say that yet, but yeah, it's quite good. All right, another Haruki Murakami. This is Kafka on the Shore. I love Kafka, the actual writer, so much. I thought I was gonna like this a lot, and there are definitely parts of it that are really quite good. This sort of, again, I don't quite know how to describe the plot, but it follows sort of two casts of characters. One of them is a guy who can talk to cats, which is pretty awesome, and another one is sort of like a young kid who runs away from home. But I don't know, I felt like it was trying to be deeper than it actually was, and it didn't quite work out, and I wasn't a huge fan of the end. So I'm gonna put it in the same tier as After Dark, in that it was kind of just a meh book to me. This is Labyrinth by Borges. This is almost a complete collection of his short stories. And yeah, I mean, he's really just one of the best short story writers there is. He talks about so many issues that I'm really interested in. It's all very existential. Yeah, I mean, these are some of the best short stories you're gonna read. Do I want to sell my soul to read it again for the first time? I'm gonna say no, just because I think, because there's so many short stories in here, I mean, a lot of them are only like 4 or 5 pages. He does cover a lot of ground over and over again, and it gets a little bit repetitive. So I'm gonna say overall, it's just really, really great. Definitely read some of them. But yeah, maybe I'm not gonna sell my soul for it. All right, Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. This is the only Virginia Woolf I've read so far. I want to read a lot more by her. This one didn't quite do it all the way for me. I thought it was really good, but I don't know. I think others of her work are probably going to be of more interest to me. So I'm going to say just would recommend. And I think others by her have the potential to go even higher. But this follows the life of Mrs. Dalloway. Not even the life, just her one day. Stream of consciousness, but it follows a lot of other characters as well, as they sort of like weave in and out of her life for that day. And there's a lot of really interesting passages in here. Again, interesting topics are covered. Yeah, would recommend. All right, then it's The Big Daddy, Moby Dick by Herman Melville. This is kind of a gargantuan of a book. I mean, it took me like 1.5 years or something to read, albeit I wasn't reading it super consistently. But it's a work of art. It really goes just about everywhere you could imagine. Talks about so many different things. The style changes all the time. It's like, for when it was written, it's like a super modern book, which is pretty crazy. And yeah, I mean, there's just so much to admire here, so much to analyze. This of course follows Ahab in his hunt for the white whale, Moby Dick. It's a story of vengeance. As Olson points out, it's really a retelling of King Lear in a lot of ways. And yeah, I mean, it's fantastic. It would take me a while to reread it for the first time, but I would sell my soul to do that. All right, here we have one of the books that I read on sort of my existential kick. This is Nausea by Jean-Paul Sart. I don't know, in a lot of ways, this is super similar to The Stranger by Camus, about sort of like a disillusioned young man living in a city who sort of like realizes the pointlessness of everything. But I don't think it's quite told as well as The Stranger is. I think that there's a lot of flaws with this book, although it is interesting. And I would probably just put it in like the mid-tier. I wasn't a huge fan. I also just realized that like almost all my Camus is at the end here, so you're gonna get a lot of it back to back, which I apologize for, but he's definitely one of the authors I've read the most from. And actually going back to Dostoevsky here now, we have Notes from Underground. I'm trying to think if this is my favorite one by him. And I think it is. This is sort of 2 short stories, though they're connected. about a man who is sort of like an outcast from society. I mean, it's like a classic Dostoevskian character. A lot of philosophical stuff in here, of course. But yeah, I mean, it's just the classic thing with Dostoevsky where his writing is never quite enough for me, and it's a critique that I have with a lot of works just in general, and that's that, you know, they'll criticize things, but then they'll never quite put forward their own view of how things should be, which I kind of have a problem with. I think it's really easy to criticize things. It's a lot harder to actually put forward solutions, and I wish Dostoevsky would maybe try to do that a little bit more, other than just say like, oh, religion is going to save everything. So that's my main problem with Dostoevsky, and you know, I can acknowledge how the story itself is good, and then put aside my differences in that sense. But even so, I think there's kind of a limit here, and I'm actually going to change my Dostoevsky ranking, and this might be a little controversial, but I'm going to put Notes from Underground and Would Recommend, and I'm actually going to move Crime and Punishment back down to the middle tier, because I do like Notes from Underground more than Crime and Punishment. So I think there has to be a rearrangement going on here. And actually, speaking of rearrangements, I think I'm going to move Tough. Okay, I'm going to move Go Went Gone down to Not My Cup of Tea. Yeah, I mean, the more I think about this book, the more I realize it just didn't quite work for me. And similarly, I'm actually going to move Kafka on the Shore down as well, because I definitely liked After Dark more than it. And yeah, I like some parts of Kafka on the Shore, but for the most part, I wasn't a huge fan. Also, not quite sure where to put this next one. This is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. He has a lot of other books that I think I want to read, because this one didn't do it for me. Though this is sort of like a dystopian, tells the story of these kids growing up who, I don't know, there's this like mysterious event in their life that they're all sort of raised up to be prepared for, but you're never quite sure what it is until later in the book. Yeah, and dystopians just aren't quite my thing, so I wasn't a huge fan. I think I'm gonna put it in Not My Cup of Tea, because maybe other people are gonna like it more than me, but because I don't like dystopians, and that's sort of like a lot of what this book is about, yeah, not my cup of tea. Here we have Normal People by Sally Rooney. This is the only Sally Rooney I've read. It probably won't be the last one I read, even though I'll spoil it here. I didn't quite like it all that much. It's about Marianne and Connell, who are growing up and, you know, sort of fall in love with each other. They start dating, but they're pretty awful to each other, which I know is sort of the point. And then they fall out, and it sort of follows them through the rest of their lives, and how that relationship sort of affects them still to this day, and sort of shapes who they are. But there wasn't a lot in here that I really loved. I know other people enjoy it more than me, and I'm hesitant to say that it's bad, so I'm gonna say it's not my cup of tea. Now, definitely one of the more surprising ones on here, this is 9 Stories by J.D. Salinger. This is a collection of his short stories. And I did read The Catcher in the Rye in high school, but it's been so long, and I probably skimmed most of it, so I really don't remember much of it, which is why I'm not ranking it on here. But I know some people love that book and some people hate it. I really need to reread it. I think I probably will like it, but I actually really love 9 Stories. These are a whole bunch of short stories filled with, honestly, pretty deranged characters, most of them. They're all crazy in some way, but that makes it a pretty entertaining read. Some of it's a little bit repetitive, but other bits are really great. So yeah, you could skip around here, read the ones that seem interesting to you, but overall it's a really great collection, so I'm gonna put it in really good. All right, then we have undoubtedly my favorite Murakami that I've read so far. This is Norwegian Wood. This is also like one of the most normal books that he's written. A lot of his other books sort of have these like surrealist elements to them, of course, magical realism and all that. But Norwegian Wood is pretty much just like a classical love story. It's, of course, got the problems that a lot of Murakami's books have, with sort of the objectification of women. But I think if you can see past that, there's a lot of really interesting stuff in here, particularly about mental health. It's pretty touching. I mean, he has a knack to write just passages that will stick in your head. That said, it's not a perfect book, but it is quite enjoyable. So I would put it in, high would recommend, not quite in the really, really good category. Okay, I think this might be the last of books that I've read for school. This is The Reader by Bernhard Schlink. And this is another book about post-war Germany. And it's about a kid growing up. And he actually develops this very strange relationship with an older woman, which he doesn't really know anything about her. But of course, as the relationship goes on and as he gets older, he comes to learn who she is and what she's done. It's pretty traumatic. It's honestly kind of a tough read, but it is really good. So I'm gonna put it in would recommend. I think if you're looking for a book about post-war Germany, this is probably the one to read, though. I mean, Gravity's Rainbow also fits in that category, and that's really the better book there. But this one's a lot easier than Gravity's Rainbow, so do with that what you will. Okay, this is Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. This is my first Jane Austen that I've read, though definitely not my last. This is about a group of sisters growing up, and sort of the romantic relationships that they come across, which are, of course, frustrated at seemingly just about every turn. But somehow it all works out pretty well in the end for them. And it's full of Jane Austen, sort of the wit that she's known for, and it manages to be pretty entertaining for an older book. I'm gonna say I would recommend it. Don't think it quite fits in these higher tiers up here, but it is really great, and I look forward to reading more by her. On to The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I'll get it out of the way here. This was not the book for me. I had a lot of problems with this book, which I went over in my May and June reading wrap-ups. If you're interested in hearing more of my thoughts about it, go check that video out. It's about a group of friends at a New England university who sort of fall unwittingly into the murder of one of their friends in the group. And then it, of course, deals with all the consequences of that. I was expecting a deeper book than it actually is, but it's written kind of like Pulp Fiction, which I was not a huge fan of. And yeah, the plot didn't do it for me. The characters didn't do it for me. So I'm gonna say not my cup of tea. All right, this is Stoner by John Williams. This is about a kid growing up who realizes his love for English. He studies at university, sort of against the will of his parents, who wanted him to become a farmer and inherit the family farm. But he ends up becoming a professor at the university that he attended, teaching English. He gets in a relationship and marries this woman, and their relationship is not good. And it sort of deals with him, his thoughts on life, and it's sort of the classic example of stoicism. It's pretty existential at times. I think a lot of people who are in sort of the literary world would get a lot out of this book. I really liked it. I think I'm gonna put it in the really good category. Yeah, it's pretty special. Then another classic, this is The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. This is about a young woman who suffering from depression, and how that affects her life. It's really hard. It's a tough read, but it's really good at the same time. I think it's pretty much a modern classic at this point. Everyone should probably read it at some point. I want to do a reread of it because I think there's a lot of things that I missed, but Plath has really great writing, so I'm going to put it in the really good category. Okay, then we have The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. This is the last of his that I've read, but I'll probably read more from him at some point. This is the story of a family, 3 brothers in particular, and also their father's a very important figure in their lives as well. There's a lot going on in this book. Obviously, there's a lot of religious themes as well. And I think it's probably the most philosophically deep of all of his books. It might be my favorite by him as well. I definitely like it more than Crime and Punishment. I think it worked better for me. I can't decide if I like it more than Notes from Underground or not. I should probably do a reread of it at some point. But yeah, I mean, there's some really interesting issues tackled in this. I'm gonna put in the would recommend tier. I think if you're gonna read any Dostoevsky, I would probably recommend this one, though it is hard because it's so long. You might be better off starting with Notes from Underground. That's sort of the give and take here. Is I think Brothers Karamazov might be better, but Notes from Underground is more accessible, so it's really up to you with which one you want to start with. All right, this is The Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. I know it's sort of a meme book, but I have read it. It was actually kind of a while ago, so I need to do a reread of it as well. It's not super long, so it's pretty easy to get through. It's not super dense either. But I think because of that, there's sort of like a limit with how much you can get out of it. It's not a super detailed account of anything, but definitely, I mean, it's like the baseline theory that you need to read. I mean, I need to read more theory in general, but definitely you got to read this one at some point. I'm going to put in the would recommend here. Whew, this is taking longer than expected, so if you're still here, thanks for sticking with me, but we're getting into some good ones next, so yeah. This is The Crying of Lot 49 by Thomas Pynchon. This is one of my favorite books of all time, really. If you want to get into Pynchon, it's really short, but it's got all of the Pynchon details in it. There's so much in it. Tells a story of Oedipa Maas, who sort of like has to execute the will of her late lover in Verarity, and doing so leads her on this sort of wild chase, uncovering clue after clue of maybe this broader conspiracy. Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic. I think out of all the books on here that I would sell my soul to read again for the first time, this one is probably like the one I most want to do that for. I don't know why I can't put it in the leftmost spot, but yeah, I mean, this book is unlike anything else I've ever read. Well, maybe Gravity's Rainbow comes close, but still. Okay, this is The Castle by Kafka. This, unfortunately, is a book he never finished in his lifetime. It's infamously sort of left unfinished, but honestly, I think that kind of is for the better with this book because it's just so absurd that I'm not sure there's an ending that could quite close the book properly. I don't even know what happens in this book, to be quite honest, other than, you know, there's this like guy who arrives in this kingdom, there's this crazy castle, and he's trying to find someone sort of like to speak to in the city. And in doing so that he can, right, he's a land surveyor, he's trying to survey the land for whatever reason. But of course he needs to talk to someone in the bureaucracy to do that, and he can never quite reach this guy. He becomes like a school teacher for whatever reason, and he basically marries a woman in the town. It's honestly a trip. It's a ride. But it's just so good. I'm gonna put it in the really good category. I know it's not gonna be for everyone, but I really enjoyed it. So okay, here's The Fall by Albert Camus. This is another one of his fiction pieces. It's basically about a guy who, it's told in a very like confessional way. He's confessing all of his sins to you, essentially. He's recounting his life. And the dude has lived a pretty interesting life. I think I probably read this book a bit too quickly. I don't think I got quite as much out of it as I would have wanted to, so I think it's due up for a reread. But of course it's Camus. You can't quite go wrong with his writing. He's a really good writer, and it's entertaining enough. I would probably put it in, I'll put it in the would recommend category. Or do I want to do that? This is getting hard. No, I'm going to put it in the good cancels out the bad. I think it's, can I do that to Camus? I don't know. Okay, fine. I'm going to keep it in would recommend. I think it is good. I think you should read it if you want to. This is To Hold Up the Sky by Leo Sishin. This is a collection of short stories, sci-fi short stories. They're all really good, actually. I mean, there's maybe like one or two duds in it, but even the duds aren't bad. So I think it's just, I'm very particular with the endings of books, and I think some of the endings here are not quite what I want from a book. Not a book, just a short story. But other stories in here are really, really great. They're super interesting, very creative. One about like a mirror which comes in front of the earth, and so it looks like there's two earths, and everyone feels like they're like falling as the mirror is approaching. A lot of really interesting ideas in here. So I'm gonna put it in the really good category. yeah, it's great. Another Kafka, this is the Metamorphosis. This is, of course, a short story. It's only like 50 or something pages, so it's really quick to get through, which is good. And I think it's probably my favorite Kafka. It's about Gregor Samsa, who wakes up one morning and he's just a giant bug. Classic Kafka. And the first thing he worries about is how he's going to get to work, which I always find just super hilarious and sort of reflects the broader themes of the book. It's very much about, capitalism and society and how your family views you if you can't be like a productive member, providing for the family. It's pretty tragic, honestly, but yeah, I mean, it's fantastic. It's going in the really good category. All right, this is the only Agatha Christie I've read so far. This is The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. I think I've got to read more Christie because I know this is one of her more popular ones, but the twist at the end of the book is a little unfair, and so it never quite felt like I had a good chance of, being able to figure it out, which I think is kind of the draw of Agatha Christie novels. But I did enjoy it. I would probably put it in the would recommend category for that reason, but I think I'm probably going to find others by her that I like even more, so I'm excited to check out more. All right, this is The Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus. This is sort of like his seminal, philosophy text. This really gives a very detailed account of his sort of philosophy of absurdism. It's very detailed. He makes a lot of really interesting references to other philosophy. And yeah, I mean, his absurdism just resonates with me pretty strongly. So if you're interested in learning about that school of philosophy, I think you do really have to read this at some point or another. It's actually not that difficult to read. I mean, there's some parts that are pretty dense, but Camus is he's very poetic with his language, and so a lot of it doesn't need to be taken super literally. Some of it is just sort of there to, be read, to read nicely. But other parts are like very deep. And so there's sort of like a give and take there where you sometimes have to be paying really close attention, analyzing details, and other times you're not going to get much out by doing that. The classic, short essay at the end with the actual myth of Sisyphus, about Sisyphus rolling the boulder up the hill, cursed to do it infinitely. As soon as it reaches the top, it falls back down. And Camus says, you must imagine Sisyphus happy. It very much reflects our own lives. We have these tasks which may seem pointless, but at the end of the day, that's really all we have. And so we have to find joy in that. I'm going to put it in the really good category. Next up is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This is another one of those sort of just vibes book. There's not much plot in here, and the plot that it does have is not super deep, but it's about a circus which sort of just magically appears in towns in the middle of the night. Will stay there for a few days, then magically appear somewhere else in the world. And the story follows these two magicians who of course are using actual magic to do all their tricks, though people don't know about that. And it's sort of like light rivals to lovers romance going on in here where they do fall in love with each other. But yeah, it was enjoyable. I didn't get quite a ton out of this book. Trying to decide where I want to put it. I'm gonna say, I'm going to say the good cancels out the bad. It's a middle of the road book. Maybe it wasn't quite my cup of tea. I do know other people enjoy it more than me, but I think it's fine here. Then there's another Camus. This is The Plague, which I, of course, read during COVID. This is about a town where, of course, as the title would suggest, they get the plague, and it deals with how the people react to that and how the town itself reacts to that. And a whole bunch of people have different outlooks about the plague, how they feel about it, what they think should be done. In a religious sense, it relates to Camus' struggle, and also this relates to the brothers Karamazov of how, this supposedly benevolent God could allow children to suffer. It's pretty horrific at times, but it's also an allegory for Camus' thoughts on absurdism. And the plague sort of is a stand-in for, like the meaninglessness, meaninglessness of life, and how people can just die at the snap of a fingers, and it's all just sort of random chance, and what you're supposed to do with that. Again, I need to reread it at some point. I think there's a lot more I could pick out of it. I think I'm going to put it in the really good category. Yeah, that's where it goes. This is the posthumous memoirs of Bras Cubas. This is a story written by an Argentinian author. I can't remember, I think it was in the 1800s. But it's like very much like Moby Dick. It has a lot of really modern ideas in it. I think I struggled a bit with it just because it is a little bit dated, and so it wasn't quite as entertaining to me as I think it could have been. But it is pretty innovative. I think I'm going to put in the good cancels out the bad. Not a bad book, just maybe not quite for me, so maybe it belongs in not my cup of tea. But yeah, it's really interesting. It's a guy who, after he's died, he's writing all of his memoirs, and so he sort of has like these interesting reflections on his life. But yeah, I think it was just all right. Okay, another one that I'll always speak very highly of, this is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This is about a guy who gets his portrait painted, but as he continues to age, he finds out that he's actually not changing at all, and instead the picture is changing for him. And so he sort of uses that as an excuse to do a whole bunch of horrible things, and then it deals with sort of like the fallout of that and how he can reconcile that with himself, which he struggles with doing, obviously. But yeah, I mean, it's a really great book. The plot is great, the characters are great, and the language is great. So I think I'm gonna put it in the Sell My Soul category. It's great. Another philosophy book by Camus that I've read, this is The Rebel. Maybe it fits more into the realm of political because it's not quite philosophy. This is sort of Camus' ideas about how you reconcile justice and liberty and freedom. He believes that things that lean too far in one direction actually end up limiting themselves, and so of course he takes sort of like the Soviet Union as an example for that, where they tried to reach equality, but by doing so they've limited their freedoms. I think I disagree pretty heavily politically with Camus on this one, so I didn't really enjoy it. I mean, I think it's very good for getting to know why Camus believes what he believes, but it's my opinion that he's wrong in what he believes, so I'm going to say the good cancels out the bad. Oops, sorry. I'm going to say the good cancels out the bad. Yeah, I mean, I just disagree pretty heavily with it, but, that's his opinions, so like I feel like it's wrong to say his opinions are bad. I don't agree with them. At this point, Camus is basically spanning like all of the tiers, because next one is The Stranger, which I'll happily say I would sell my soul to read for the first time again. Again, this is the book that pretty much got me into reading. This is about a young man who becomes very disillusioned with life, sees the meaningless of it, he faces the absurd. He actually ends up killing somebody sort of out of nowhere. And it deals with sort of just all his mental processing of that. But it is really just like the quintessential Camus. It's short, it's entertaining, it's unlike anything else I've read, and yeah, it's really amazing. Another one of my more maybe controversial picks here, this is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I know this book is super popular, a lot of her other books are popular, but I don't know, it didn't really do much for me. I think, as I've said, part of this is because I'm not a huge fan of celebrity culture, which is very much what this book is tapping into. Follows this actress, Evelyn Hugo, and, sort of all the romantic escapades that she's been on. But yeah, I mean, I think the plot was pretty predictable, a little trite, so I'm going to say not my cup of tea. I'm not sure I'll read anything else by her. Then we're getting into the only David Foster Wallace that I've read so far. This is a short story by him called The Soul's Not a Smithy, which is of course based off of a James Joyce line. But this is a really great short story. It's about this kid who is in a classroom and he's of course daydreaming out the window, not paying attention to anything that's going on anymore. But as his daydreams go on, they sort of get progressively darker and darker. And what's actually happening is that, this teacher at this blackboard who's the substitute for the day, he's kind of having like a mental breakdown, and he starts writing like kill them all on the blackboard over and over again. And so you sort of see this interesting parallel of how the kid's daydreaming connects with what is happening inside the classroom. And yeah, I mean, it's like pretty perfect David Foster Wallace, I would say. It makes me excited to read Infinite Jest at some point. So I'm gonna put it in the really good category. I liked it a lot. Another one on my existential list, this is the Sundays of Jean Desert. This is about a man, I think somewhere in France, it might be Paris, sort of in the 1900s at some point, who, you know, again, disillusioned with life, thinks about the meaninglessness of it all, you know, tries a whole bunch of different things to sort of like get the spark back in his life, but they all sort of fail. And it's about how he deals with that. I think in a lot of respects, it's just better than Nausea. I think I liked it more than Nausea. But it really doesn't come anywhere close to The Stranger. So I'm probably just gonna put it one tier up from Nausea. I'll put it in would recommend. I was a little bit disappointed with it. It is really short though, so maybe if it was longer, it would be better. But if it sounds like something interesting to you, maybe give it a look. Then we have the last Kafka that I've read so far. This is The Trial. This is about a man who is accused of a crime. We never learn what the crime is, of course, and it's about how the process that he tries to go about, you know, to defend himself in the case. The ending is pretty great, and it's got a whole bunch of Kafka's absurdities to it, little bits of surrealism mixed in. It is really good. I mean, I like all of what Kafka's written so far, so I'm going to put it in the really good category. Though I do think probably The Metamorphosis is my favorite by all of his. Another short story, this is The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. This is a book about a woman who is sort of suffering from a mental breakdown after giving birth, and so she's essentially locked in the attic of a country house. And inside the room, there's this wallpaper that she can see, and she spends all day and night looking at it. And as sort of like her mental state deteriorates, she begins to see figures in the wallpaper moving. It's written sort of like a horror story, but it's told from a very like feminist perspective, about, you know, how we deal with women's mental issues, because of course her husband thinks that, you know, she's just weak and that what she's suffering from isn't, you know, really actually happening. And so it very much talks about how we just dismiss a lot of issues that women face. It is really great. I mean, it's so short, I don't think you can go wrong by reading it, so I'm gonna say really good. This is now Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett. This is the only Beckett I've read at this point, though I'll probably read more by him. This is a play about two men who are waiting for Godot. It's overall pretty existential, as we never really find out why they're waiting for Godot. And so it's sort of like an allegory for life in a lot of respects. It's absurd in a lot of ways. It's funny. It's pretty entertaining. I think I was slightly disappointed by it, but I don't think it's bad by any means. I'm going to put it in the would recommend category. Another one of my favorites here, this is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. This is like a classic Gothic sort of Victorian novel. It's about Heathcliff and Catherine, who grow up together on this estate, and they sort of fall in love with each other. But of course, they're super vile to each other. But at the same time, they're really linked together by love, essentially. And it's really interesting. Again, for being an older classic, it stands up really well to this day. It's just as entertaining. It's pretty easy to read. There's something about it. I would say I'd be willing to sell my soul to read it again for the first time. I really loved it. All right, this is We've Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. She's very much known for writing sort of like psychological horror stories, which this one sort of follows in line with. But in a lot of ways, it's kind of cozy. It's like kind of like cottagecore-esque. It's about these two, I think they're sisters living in a house. And, you know, they're sort of been ostracized. They've been ostracized from the town for an event that happened in their past. And we come to learn more about that event. And it's kind of like an allegory for the decay of, you know, American society. Sort of falls in line with a lot of what Faulkner writes about as well. Super, super interesting, really gorgeous, really well written. I'm gonna put it in the really good tier. All right, we're so close. Only two more. This is White Noise by Don DeLillo. This is the first Don DeLillo that I've read. I'm in the middle of Liber right now, also by him. But this book was really, really great. Blew all my expectations out of the water. I think I've talked about this book a few times on my channel, so if you're really interested in learning more about it, you can go check those videos out. But it's a postmodern masterpiece. I would definitely sell my soul for it. Yeah, it's up there with my favorite books. I love it. And the last book, as you can see, it wasn't that many, all in all, but it was quite a few. So if you stuck with me throughout this entire video, I very much appreciate it. And the last one is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. It's also the last book that I finished. And honestly, I would say I was pretty disappointed by this book. I'd heard really great things about it, and I'd been meaning to read it for like almost 2 years now. But when it actually came to it, I don't know, I think it kind of fell flat. It's about this man who is in this house, and the house is seemingly infinite. There's just room after room after room, and all of the rooms are filled with these statues. All the statues are different. There's 3 floors to the house. The bottom floor is an ocean, and the tides come, they rise and they fall every day, and they sort of fill up the middle floor, and the top floor is like the sky, essentially. It's philosophical in some ways. I was honestly hoping for more out of it. I wish it had gone a little deeper with its ideas. And yeah, I think the book could have been longer. I think that there's a lot of stuff that was just never fully fleshed out with it. And sort of like the central plot point that the main character is trying to figure out, you figure out like 100 pages in advance. And so you're sort of just waiting for him to figure it out with you, which gets kind of boring after a certain point. So I think the story could have been a bit more convoluted. Yeah. I think I'm going to say the good cancels out the bad. It really was not one of my favorite books that I've read. I don't regret reading it, but I wish it had done more for me. Okay, that is all of them. So as you can see, it's actually pretty top heavy. Most of the books that I read, I end up enjoying. And as I said, that's because I try to pick books that I think I'm going to like. But there's not too many down here in the low ones. You know what? I just realized I'm going to move The Secret History. I'm sorry. I'm putting it into, I felt like I was wasting my time reading it. It's not the book for me. Yeah, I didn't really like it much. I honestly kind of wish I hadn't read it because it's pretty long. So yeah, that's it. Again, if you stuck with me for all of this, I very much appreciate it. If you're interested in hearing more from me, make sure to subscribe. And I hope you have a good one. Bye.